Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another in our series of national webinars. Today, very topical, inflation beating buy-to-let strategies. And I'm delighted to welcome Joe Carbonaro as our guest today. And I'll just do a very quick introduction of Joe very shortly. My name is Don Robbie. I am an Nrla regional representative in the West Midlands. Joe and I have worked together, so hopefully this will go relatively seamlessly. So Joe, a warm welcome to you. Just check.
Thanks very much.
That's great. Yeah, I love that when a plan comes together. So today is very much about buy-to-let strategies in very challenging times. But just before we get into that, just to talk about the Zoom control panel, I hope that most of you now are familiar with Zoom as a platform for meetings and webinars. Certainly, it's ours that we're using in the Nrla. The two key buttons that you need to worry about are the ones that control your microphone and your video. You won't be using video. Your video will be turned off today, but we may, if we get a chance, but only if there's time, we may be able to ask you to unmute and ask a live question. But it's much more likely that we're going to go to another button, which is chat. And I've just put the chat box up as an example. Please, if you have any questions or comments as Joe and I are talking, and particularly Joe during his presentation, if you put them in the chat box, if you've got questions you'd like to ask, the main way we handle those in these national webinars is for me to ask the question on your behalf. So that's there. You may also, depending on how your panel is configured, you may also be able to put things like thumbs up, thumbs down, etc. And as I said, if we do get the opportunity to ask live questions, we'll have to wait and see how it goes. If you can raise your hand, that may be a way that we can easily come to you and get you to unmute and ask a question live, but we'll see how it goes. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest today. He's already been on, I think twice now, Joe, onto national webinars, and he's also been the star of several of our regional webinars with regional teams. So Joe, again, welcome to today. Joe is the global head of consulting for one of our Nrla nationally recognized suppliers, GetGround. And GetGround have a platform used by thousands of landlords in terms of the formation and establishing a limited company, and then the assistance with that in terms of accounting for that and the overall management of your portfolio through limited companies. So Joe, just before we get into today, just a quick question. We've just come to the end of the first tax year when us poor, and I count myself in this, us poor investor landlords who are not in limited companies, have had the full force of clause 24 taxation. I certainly paid a lot more tax. We've also got a very uncertain economic climate and rapidly rising inflationally in terms of cost of living, but also increasing in terms of mortgage interest rates. So it's a pretty challenging time. What's your perspective on what landlords are facing at the moment?
I think the overall sentiment in the market, Don, and thank you very much for that introduction as well, is that really you're right. It is a challenging time, I think, unilaterally really for both private landlords and sort of large company structures that will do these things as well, right the way up to kind of the PRS sector here in the UK. I think one of the things that I'm actually going to be talking to you about today is really some of the economic effects, really in terms of inflation generally and what we're seeing, how that's actually affecting landlords, what some of the efficiencies that we perhaps can draw. But I think generally it is actually quite a difficult time for landlords. I think here at GetGround, again, we are primarily specialists in setting up, structuring and managing limited companies. But I think really our forte and what we really want to bring to the market is to try and squeeze every little bit of efficiency that we possibly can from buy-to-let investments. And I think, whilst we're definitely advocates of using limited company structures, that isn't for everybody. No. We think that at this moment in time, one of the reasons why we're so proud of our relationship with you guys at the NRLA is really that we believe that, whilst we are trying to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of limited company structures, the information that you guys provide and your sort of open source forums are also really good for landlords who may not be set up and structured using limited companies. But I think generally, just a kind of very quick snapshot before we actually dive into the data, which is what I'm going to do with you guys today, is that, yes, it is a challenging time. And I think we need to be far better at the moment, actually, as landlords than we've ever been in order to make the investments that we're making, in some cases, even stack up. And I'm hoping that I can shed a little bit of light on that for you guys today.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I think any help and any advice and guidance and helping us to think outside the box is music to any private landlord at the moment. So specifically today, Joe is going to be talking about protecting property investments in this very challenging economic climate, particularly during rising costs, inflation. Specifically, he's going to make a comment about the recent budget, spring budget announcement, or statement, as it's called, and how it affects private landlords. I don't think there's much in there, but as I said, I think you want to just quickly cover that. And then also, which is going to be music to my ears, and I'm sure others, is assisting tenants to cope in this very challenging climate. Because one of the big worries about private landlords is, are our tenants going to be able to manage finances so that we get our rent? And also look at limited company buy-to-let tax efficiencies, owner loans, and just really looking into the future of what that might be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Joe, if you want to take over, and over to you, and then we'll ask questions at the end. Thanks very much.
Wonderful stuff. Thanks again, Don, for that introduction. I do really appreciate that. Okay, great. Can you guys see that okay?
That's all, we can see that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, just allow me to pull up my my notes here. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Wonderful. So again, who are we? And again, thanks very much to those of you that have tuned on today to listen to a lunchtime brief on kind of inflation. My name's Joe. I am the Global Head of Consulting here at GetGround. GetGround, we are specialists in setting up, structuring, and doing the ongoing management and accounting of limited company structures for buy-to-let. I think we are absolutely delighted for the second year running now to be partnered with the NRLA. And as Don mentioned, I seem to be a bit more of a face for you guys on local and regional webinars and things. And again, I think that what we want to do is much the same as you guys, insofar as we want to offer people a really, really great service that aligns well to our mission and work at GetGround, and part of that is having your partnership at the NRLA. We did actually just attend the Property Investor Show. I don't know if many of you were there over at the Excel Centre last weekend. I had the pleasure of our stand backing onto the NRLA stand, which was fantastic, and I know there was lots of interests at both stands as well. So what I'm going to be discussing today is really kind of inflation beating buy-to-let. And I think a lot of landlords, one of the things that we're really struggling for at the moment is actually tangible data, tangible insights on some of the things that we can actually find out about, not only ourselves and how we might be able to have strategies for protecting our own investments into property, but also what are other landlords doing? What do other landlords think about X, Y, Z? And I think these things are really important. And actually, our data team have done a really good job in collecting some fantastic data, which I'm honoured to be able to share with you here today. Brilliant. So essentially, today's discussion is going to be in three parts, as Don mentioned. The first is that we're going to be talking about the spring statement. The second is a kind of cost of living crisis. And the third is really around kind of company buy-to-let. So inflation, as we all know, is something of a bit of a buzzword at the moment. And essentially, inflation really is talking about living costs. The way in which we measure inflation tends to be the consumer price index, which is essentially how much or what the percentage change year on year in a a trolley or a bag of consumer goods is. So bread, milk, cheese, and the amount of percentage change in those items on a year-on-year basis. Now, it's really important at the moment that we have this context, and that what we're seeing is that living costs at the moment are really rising at a pretty extraordinary rate, unfortunately, leaving a lot of households with less money to spend on everyday goods. Rapid inflation will also erode the value of people's savings. Therefore, if you do have money at the moment in a bank account not doing anything, it may certainly be worth you thinking about using that for a buy-to-let. So again, to set the context of this discussion with some broader statistics, inflation has been well above the Bank of England's 2% target rate for many, many months now. And despite interest rate rises, it is continuing to grow. The consumer price index, which again is that bag of goods, currently stands at 6.2%, but is expected to climb to a 40-year high of 8.7% by the end of the year, contributing to a year-long average of 7.4%. Now, that is considerably higher than it's been in a lot of cases. And really, a lot of people keep asking, how quickly do we expect this to come down to that 2% target? Right now, the honest answer is anybody's guess. The Bank of England says that they expect inflation to be back at its target within 2 or 3 years' time. And I think they're being deliberately vague there. In other words, I think we need to be prepared for high inflation to be a thing in our lives as landlords for a number of years. And I think that we would actually do ourselves a disservice to not think that that would actually be the case. We know this is a major topic this year, and one that actually is going to impact all of us, even if we're not actually landlords at this moment. And again, at GetGround, we want to educate and inform our customers and partners around all aspects of property investing. And that means being informed on big topics like this and likely impact on landlords and their portfolios. So before we begin diving into that data, I'd just like to do a little bit of an introduction to GetGround. Don, you can't escape the shameless plug from me, I'm afraid. And essentially, we are, as Don mentioned earlier, an online service based here in the United Kingdom, specifically tailored to setting up, structuring and managing limited company structures. It's a really, really nice, neat online platform, one that makes it really, really easy to manage. And essentially, it's a one-stop shop, a complete A to Z of everything that you might need in order to set up, structure, and manage. So providing of a business bank account, all of the accounting, tax filing, tax returns, done in a highly organized and digital way. If you are interested in having a bit more of a look at GetGround and what we do, please do feel free to navigate to www.getground.co.uk. Brilliant. So let's return to the wider picture, for landlords. So on the 23rd of March, the Chancellor gave his spring statement to Parliament. And I think it's important to look at what actually happened versus what the industry was braced for. In reality, there was nothing in the spring statement specifically directed at landlords. However, there was much to give property investors cause to stop, reflect, and maybe think about repositioning as necessary. So if we have a look at some of these areas one by one, first of all, the 5% VAT tax relief will reduce to 0% VAT due on materials needed for landlords to make eco improvements to their properties. I think this was quite a big thing for a lot of people, particularly if they were struggling with some of the more topical instances this year, cladding, things like that. The Chancellor reduced tax on items such as solar panels, insulation, heat pumps, therefore from 5% to 0%. The change is going to take effect from this month and will last 5 years and forms actually a reversal of a ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union which had previously restricted the application of VAT relief on the installation of environmental and social management systems, or ESMs. Now, whilst EPC has been a legal requirement for all homes since 2007, and those of you that aren't aware, there are going to be some changes to for landlords, which means that people need to have a minimum EPC rating of C or above by 2028. This tax relief is actually going to be very positive. All right, it's one of the few kind of situations where I think we all sort of thought that's such a great thing to have happened. I suppose as well, we had some commentary from Ben Beadle over at the Nrla, who said that it remained disappointing that the government has again failed to explain what will be required of the rental sector when it comes to energy improvements, but that the general kind of tax relief was going to be welcome. I do think we need, just an aside, I do agree with Ben there. We actually do need a little bit more clarity on that for landlords, particularly around explaining what is actually going to be required of the rental sector in a tangible way to make sure that each landlord has that EPC grade C rating. Now, next up was a bit more mooted, but it was the additional 1% SDT levy, or SDLT levy, I should say, for English landlords, and that actually didn't happen, which is quite interesting. And I think there was a lot of rumours ahead of the spring statement as to whether this change would actually go ahead or not. Our view, and I don't think GetGround is alone in actually thinking this, is that it would have been highly punitive for both landlords and tenants, and would likely drive out of the market many landlords who actually play a really important role in maintaining a healthy private sector, healthy private rented sector, for the millions of people in the UK who do need to rent, and also that want to rent as a lifestyle choice. And the third thing here is that there was an increase in the national insurance threshold. And I think, facing pressure to tackle the UK's cost of living crisis, the Chancellor described the national insurance threshold increase as the single biggest tax cut for a decade. Reaction, however, has probably been a little bit more nuanced across the industry. And so James Forrester, who's the managing director of Birmingham estate agents Barrows and Forrester, as one example here, described such a bold move on income tax is of course welcome, but let's not forget this is somewhat diminished by an increase in both personal and employer national insurance, as well as the impending tax hike amongst corporation tax. And this sentiment actually is backed up by the data as well. So despite the Chancellor's announcement, the Office for Budget Responsibility, or the OBR, said that the amount of tax paid compared to GDP will hit the highest level since the 1940s in the coming years. So what does this wider economic backdrop really mean for property investors? At GetGround, we recently polled hundreds and hundreds of UK buy-to-let landlords to take, I suppose, the pulse of their thinking here towards their investment into property during a high inflation environment. How is it set to impact property investors? Will it encourage them to change course completely? What mitigating factors might they be considering when it comes to assessing the future health of their investments? And of course, landlords are not immune to worries around inflation. Yet, whilst it can impact the profitability of life as a landlord, our research in fact suggested that if anything, it's only adding to the longer term appeal of investing into property, which might be contrary to what some of you thought I was going to say here today. And so let's delve into some of that data. First of all, overall concern around inflation by landlords is well-founded. More than 4 in 5, or 83% of those surveyed, said they were concerned or very concerned that rising inflation would have a negative impact on their ability to continue to invest profitably in the rental market. So where is this concern actually most felt? And it inevitably comes down to costs, right? So 9 in 10 landlords, 90% of us told us they expected rising inflation to have an impact on the cost of maintaining their property investments. I think we all knew that that was going to be something that we would have to deal with. More than half, so 52% of respondents, expect the cost of managing their property investments to increase by between 25 and 50%. And 1 in 10 or 10% of those people expect costs to increase by more than 50%. There were also certain areas of expenditure frequently picked out by investors of being particularly susceptible to the pressures of inflation. For example, it's no secret that energy bills, 52%, which is shown here, are becoming a growing concern really for everybody in the UK, regardless of whether you're a homeowner, investor, or a tenant. And we've also seen the energy price cap hiked to a new record high, meaning the average home will see bills increase by £700, which is astronomical, and I think it hurts us as landlords even more so, with the likelihood, unfortunately, of further substantial increases coming forward. Similarly, mortgage costs are likely to rise. The bank base rate has increased twice in the last 3 months, with the expectation that there are further increases to come. In fact, the markets have priced 2 more in for this year, with the base rate likely to sit higher than 2% in 12 months' time. For investors who've taken advantage of record low tracker rates, those increases would lead to noticeably higher mortgage repayments on a monthly basis. But I'm going to take some water here. That doesn't tell the whole story. You might think that such a scenario would cause some landlords to think twice about their investments, to consider scaling back the size of their portfolio. However, that actually doesn't ring true for most investors. Our study found that only 29% intend to reduce their activity while inflation is high. By contrast, a quarter intend to increase their investment activity, while a further third are opting to do nothing at all. Deciding to do nothing is in and of itself an active choice. Of course, these investors are comfortable with the prospects for their property investment in the long term, and not just while inflation is at a higher level. And we agree with that. We think this confidence is well placed. Ultimately, property only becomes a less attractive option if investors can find a better inflation-beating return from other assets. By contrast, the prospects for the housing market do remain extremely strong. There's an underlying shortage of housing in the UK, and Property Mark, the estate agent body, recently reported that average estate agency branches had 100 potential buyers on their books, but only 19 properties, a record low. It's a signal of really high demand in the market. And that imbalance doesn't just mean that landlords who invest in the right areas will have a steady stream of tenants to whom they can rent, but it is also that the value of their investments are likely to continue to increase. While no one is expecting price growth on the scale that we saw last year, 10.8% to be exact, in the year to December, according to the Office of National Statistics. The fact that demand continues to dwarf supply so substantially, so significantly, means that healthy price growth in the values of your properties is all but certain. Okay. What's more, rental growth really, we think, is going to help to take the edge off those increasing maintenance costs for landlords. And Rightmove, our friends over at Rightmove, have reported that rents are rising at the fastest rate on record, by up almost 10% on this point just 1 year ago. Now, the best landlords don't simply hike rents whenever the opportunity presents itself, but equally, this is a time when some will clearly be thinking about increasing what they currently charge. And when it comes to UK landlords' assessment of other inflation-beating investment opportunities, we were really intrigued to understand how property actually compares to that. Gold commodities are actually the most popular alternative inflation-beating assets. And that's certainly true amongst landlords, with 26% and 22% of landlords investing in those two asset classes, respectively. That being said, 2 in 5, or 38% of UK landlords, still believe that their property investments will outperform all other assets in that category. So while, like the rest of us, property investors are just not immune to the impact of rising inflation, our research does show that the most UK landlords don't actually want to pass that burden on to their tenants if they can help it, which is great. I think we're moving, as a kind of general commentary, I think we're moving much towards a much more professional buy-to-let sector, but also a little bit more of a benevolent buy-to-let sector as well. And the reality in this situation, as is everything that I'm going to be talking to you about today, I suppose we must be clear that this makes business sense as well. The inconveniences of tenancy voids and mispayments, so mispayments of rent, are things that we want to avoid. So landlords who are accommodating to their tenants in ways that are meaningful for them now proves that blending longer term thinking with empathy actually makes better business sense. Our survey data showed that 69% of landlords feel a responsibility to help their tenants mitigate the impact of the cost of living crisis on their lives, which is massive, right? That's a really nice thing to hear as well. The most important actions landlords believe that they can take to help tenants protect themselves against rising costs are temporarily freezing rents, 37%, making energy efficiency upgrades, 35%, and agreeing longer tenancy durations at 34%. And so finally, we consulted UK landlords on the management of their property investments through limited company structures, which is really our forte here at GetGround. Of those investing through limited company structures, 78% said limited company investing was helping to mitigate the impact of inflation on their investments, with 73% agreeing that limited company investing made them feel more protected against rising inflation than owning in their personal name. And again, I think a lot of that comes from some of the advantages that limited company structures do present to us. First of all, tax efficiencies, and this is mainly around things like tax deductibility. So as you know, and Don, I think you mentioned earlier that we just had our full year of Section 24. Using a limited company structure, anything that represents a cost, so ground rent, service charge, property management fees, interest on the mortgage as well, are all still tax deductible, meaning that for the vast majority of people, there's a lower effective rate of tax, and that's 19% in corporation tax versus either 20% or 40% in income tax on a smaller proportion of what people are bringing in every year. There's also things like limited liability, so separating any of the risk associated with holding individual assets from every other part of your life. So naturally, these things from both a tax perspective and a non-tax perspective are helping the vast majority of landlords feel much more protected against rising inflation than actually owning a property in a personal name. And again, there's some details of the tax there. I'm not going to go through those today. I think some of those things I've actually covered off on other webinars, but things like being able to deduct all of the mortgage interest, being able to make owner's loan contributions to a limited company. These are some really awesome mechanisms that we have in order to not just preserve our financial wealth and make sure that we're running each individual property investment to its full potential, but also that we're protected in a liability perspective as well. So I'm not going to go through that stuff today, but if you would like to have a little bit more of a chat with us on the wider product that we offer here at GetGround, what our methodology is for explaining the setup, structuring and management of limited companies, please do get into touch. And so I think if I could just summarize everything for you, I appreciate I have gone through that quite quickly. There's no question really that inflation, particularly at the level that we're seeing currently, can have a negative impact on the immediate profitability of property investment. However, I think that professional investors rarely take such a short-term view of things, instead choosing to focus on longer-term prospects for the properties that they purchase. And on that front, bricks and mortar still remains one of the most impressive assets around. Please do get into touch with us. And there's a lot more information. If this is a topic that is very, very close to your heart, there's a lot more information with respect to the impact of inflation on UK landlords on our website, our blog, which again is www.getground.co.uk. And we're due to be publishing a lot more research in the next month on this topic as well. So I hope that's all right. Don, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's great, Joe. Thanks for that. Yeah, we've obviously gone through quite a lot about living in a very challenging environment at the moment. Before I come to a question from Claire, I just wanted to ask you, because it's a question we get asked every single landlord meeting that we run. Can I move my investor properties that are in my name, can we move them into a limited company? And I know it's a big question, but I think we need to just ask that and just get you as the expert to clarify what are the considerations and who you go for advice on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, if I had a penny for every time I'd been asked it recently, I'd be a rich man. I think, it is worth mentioning that I think with regards to doing this, you will want to seek independent legal and taxation advice. Now, unfortunately, when we set up limited company structures, they are seen to be a legal entity in their own right. They have their own independent legal identity. And really, I think the honest answer is it's very legally difficult. It's phenomenally difficult. In most cases, moving something from your personal name over to a limited company structure constitutes a sale, which means that you might have capital gains tax, lawyers' fees for both the buy side, sell side, any early repayment charges on the mortgage, and of course stamp duty at the other end, which is very, very penalizing, unfortunately. Now, there may be some other ways in which you can do this, but my honest take is that it's a difficult situation to be in, and in most cases, the capital gains tax liability, the stamp duty, early repayment charges, it does tend to be a difficult thing for people to justify.
Okay, thank you for that. Just on that sort of very sort of theme, both Jessica and I hope it's Patricia, or not, it could be Patricia, but I'm assuming it might be Patricia, have asked this question. They both own properties, their buy-to-let properties outright, so they're not encumbered by any mortgage. Is there still any, notwithstanding what you've just said about the costs, is there any benefit in actually having unencumbered properties in a limited company?
Is there any benefit to having unencumbered properties in a limited company? Undoubtedly, yes. Undoubtedly, yes. Particularly dependent on, and again, this is not advisory in any statement, so please do seek your own independent legal and tax advice. Right. As my disclaimer, I am not providing you with any advice here on what to do and how to do it. But yes, I mean, essentially, if you're in a situation whereby, through your salary, you're earning, £48,000 or more, and you have a property which is giving you, let's say, £1,000 a month in rental yield unencumbered, that is going to add on top of your income tax allowance. So you'd be paying 40% on your earnings versus 19%, maybe up to 25%, dependent on how many companies you have and your situation there. 19% is considerably less than 40%. Right. The additional things are, for example, a lot of people actually buy-to-let properties to supplement their income in retirement. And one of the mechanisms that we have here at GetGround is a director's pension contribution, whereby we can move £10,000 per company, per year, per director to a pension pot as a maximum, as a direct expense to the company itself, similarly to mortgage interest or ground rent. And that means it's tax-free. which is really amazing for people that want to use limited company structures to supplement their income in retirement. There's also a dividend allowance. The vast majority of our landlords use owner's loan repayments, which again are tax-free. There's no further tax after corporation tax for owner's loan. So I would almost certainly say yes. Additionally, there are a whole host of non-tax benefits as well. Limited liability, the improved estates and inheritance planning aspect of having shares as a mechanism. So I would almost certainly say yes, regardless of whether you have a mortgage on the property or not, there are going to be significant benefits to using limited company structures. But as a disclaimer, they will likely be based on your own personal scenario.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to come to Claire's question because she was the very first one, and let's get that while it's fresh in our mind. You gave us a lot of information. You gave us quite a lot of results, very similar to what the Nrla does, is regular surveys. Claire asks, is that information available on the GetGround website, and what can people also benefit on the on the GetGround website in terms of helping to manage their portfolios?
Absolutely, yeah. So we will be releasing this data in a bit more of a formal way. This webinar is recorded. I don't know if you can stomach watching it again, but the webinar is recorded. A lot of our research and things we will make available to NRLA members free of charge. So if there is particular snippets of information, please do feel free to get in touch. We've got a really great blog as well, which is regularly updated. And I think we really want to evangelize limited company structures, and really, if we can provide as much help, support as we can free of charge, you can certainly find that on our website. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit mischievous and ask the question that everyone asks, but I remind people that we're not here to give advice. We're you need to seek professional advice, but I have to ask Joe this. Joe, is there any reason why a landlord looking to buy a property should not actually put it straight in, buy it through a limited company and put it in to a limited company? Is there any reason why landlords would not do that, given the tax and particularly for landlords who may not have a corporate life? This is their pension pot, so they have to make that as tax efficient as possible for their pensions in the future.
Absolutely. It's a really, really good question. And again, you must seek your own independent legal and tax advice here. The main reason for saying that is because so many of the benefits and how they apply and to what extent they apply are based on your personal circumstances. Now, one of the potential disadvantages, and I don't really think it is anymore, but one of the potential disadvantages to limited company structures is that mortgage rates are higher than buying properties in your personal name, with a typical comparison, 2.5% in your personal name versus maybe 3% in a limited company. And again, talk to your mortgage broker to verify that. But in that situation, there may be some instances where the amount that you're paying in mortgage interest may be better than the situation around having a buy-to-let mortgage in your personal name. Again, I think a lot of the benefits that apply and a lot of the drawbacks that have typically applied to limited companies have been done so in the way that it's typically been set up. So, typically a lot of people to set up and structure limited companies will need an accountant, a tax advisor. You might need the government to put the company into place for you, your mortgage broker, you might want a company secretary, and so on and so forth. And whenever you have situations where you involve 3, 4, 5 different people in any one transaction, it obviously becomes a lot of hassle to manage all of those people, and it obviously becomes very expensive as well. But we've kind of solved that problem here at GetGround in the sense of we will do everything for you and put into place a highly efficient limited company structure tailored specifically for a buy-to-let property. And our costs to actually run those limited company structures are very, very cost effective. So really, I would say that there may be some cases where a limited company structure is not the right thing for you to do. It represents really only a very small percentage of people that we speak to, particularly at the moment, just where the benefits of a limited company structures are so strong. And really, from a tax perspective, you've kind of got the stick at the other end as well.
Which naturally leads on to the next question, which is, if people need to take professional advice, who should they go to, Joe?
We would recommend consulting the NRLA. We think it's a really good forum for best practice support. There are lots of other recognized suppliers on there who'll be able to help you with a tax advice, whatever you may need. We will be happy to have a consultation with you and give you all of the information that you need around limited company structures in order to help you make your own educated decision on whether this is right for you. But what we can't do for you is tell you what you should do. Okay. Actually, quite a lot of our clients really like that. It's the whole, and again, excuse this analogy if you hate it, but it's the whole kind of teach a man to fish versus giving a man a fish type of analogy. We will present a lot of unbiased information to you in a one-on-one consultation to enable you to make your own educated decision on what's right for you. But we won't then tell you what what you should do effectively.
Yeah. I can say that I know from the advice line work we've done that we do not give any tax advice or anything else, and we would naturally refer people on. I'm guessing Chartered Institute of Tax registered members would be the best people to go to in terms of tax advice. Is that fair to say, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, accountants are not always tax advisors, so I would just make sure that you understand who you're speaking to and what the extent of that service is. And I mean, I would probably caveat that by saying, the vast majority of people that we speak to don't really need tremendously complex forms of tax advice. They just need certain snippets of information clearing up, which is what we can do for them. So I'd always say, come and have a chat with us. If you don't get the answers that you want or the answers that you need, we have a network, and the NRLA have a network as well of tax advisors who we could put you into touch with. But you may not need it, so come and have a chat with us first, get the answers to your questions, and then if you do need it, we'll put you into touch.
Okay, final question before we get on to, let's look at how we can handle the rising costs of living and everything else in the coming year. Do you get involved at all with going to a next stage after people have got limited companies for their buy-to-let properties, starting to look at things like trusts? Is that something that you can help with, or is that another thing that has to be referred out to specialists?
Again, these things can be rabbit holes, and you can often be in a situation of how deep do you want to go. At the moment, we don't offer trusts. We are potentially looking at making some changes and offering more structures in the form of holding companies. We're not quite there yet, but we may well be within the next month or two. So I would certainly say, again, my honest take on it would be, come and have a chat with us first. See what your situation is, get the information that you need. If you do still need tax advice, again, we can point you in the right place. Okay.
Coming on to the latest situation and cost of living and the general climate that private landlords are finding themselves in, I was very encouraged to hear that there are a lot of landlords still looking to expand their portfolio, and that will be music to the ears of central government, who I think are starting to slowly, get a bit concerned, because there are a lot of landlords, particularly of my age and my sort of time in life, but also other landlords, I think, with pressures from tax and with licensing and the general difficulty in making the level of profitability. And I know you said it's still a good return on investment, but of course people. A lot of career landlords want to make a reasonable living, during their working lives. Did your survey sort of tend to support the basis of what local authorities are telling us, that landlords are giving up and are selling up, and there is quite a big shift away from the existing landlords to the size of their portfolios, or maybe some of them are giving up altogether?
No, and that data was in the presentation as well.
Right.
We don't really see a lot of people that are echoing that sentiment.
Okay.
I think, as a general commentary, I think when we're landlording, particularly if we're long-term landlords, we can become quite preoccupied with rental yield and getting rental yield. But as we know, investing into property is really two sides to the coin. It's capital growth in your property price just as well as just as much as rental yield.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we never realize how well we've done from an investment into a property from a capital gain perspective until we sell it. But whilst inflation is one of those things that can hurt our pockets, rising prices, for example, it is also the wind in the sails of house prices. And smart investors understand that. So, for every landlord that might be very, very upset and concerned about, how their profits are going to be squeezed on a monthly basis over the coming year or two, please also bear in mind that actually the very real reality is inflation will be putting the wind in the sails of the increase in your capital value. So, now I think that the overarching sentiment from our landlords is actually now is not a great time, or I wouldn't say not a great time, but there may be a missed opportunity if you scale back your portfolio. Because if you were to wait a year or two, when inflation starts to normalize, you may see a significantly higher level of capital gain than you would have otherwise seen. Because again, inflation pushes house prices up.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the landlords that are still growing their portfolio, or new landlords or relatively new landlords coming into our business. Let's talk about housing and multiple occupation, because I see quite a lot of challenges going ahead for that. Namely, I think demand could actually start to eke away. There are some areas where HMOs are no longer full because people want, the demand is more for self-contained properties. The other thing is, of course, energy costs. If it's an HMO where there are individual room agreements, managing the actual energy price where the tenants literally are paying for that through their rent on a fixed amount, and therefore there may be some profit challenges. And thirdly, more and more HMOs are going to be subject to quite high licensing costs. We're starting to see licensing fees up to £1,800 for 5 years, which is not insignificant. Any thoughts on where landlords should be looking when they're considering investing in property, and where the rising markets are from your research, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a difficult one. And I mean, I suppose all I could give you there is a little bit of a snapshot of the data. Right now, from a just purely data perspective, Glasgow in Scotland is the best place in the UK to invest, which might be news to some, but in terms of what you can make in rent and in terms of the level of capital gain year on year, that is where the data shows us is the lucrative opportunity.
I'm going to get into trouble because we don't effectively operate in Scotland at the moment.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's
certainly at least you've got a dedicated housing court if you have to look at getting possession of property. But yeah, I mean, hotspots. It's important to go and find those hotspots, isn't it?
I think as well. There are. We talk about HMOs, and yes, naturally when we talk about inflation, we would gravitate towards the type of property investing where you would think it costs the most to run it, right? And HMOs are definitely in that bracket. But also there are other benefits to it. For example, there is actually increasing demand for that type of accommodation and shrinking supply. That's a good thing, because obviously not for the market generally, but for landlords, that's actually quite a good thing, because it means that people are likely to pay more to live in that kind of accommodation in those geographical locations. Yeah. Additionally, we can't underestimate the fact that what a HMO is might be 4, 5, 6 people living in a single dwelling. That means that you're so much less likely to get void periods. Yeah. Even if you've got one room vacant, you've got 4 other that are there. Yeah. So I think, Don, there's a really interesting thing to be said for HMOs at the moment, because whilst they certainly might be feeling the pressure at the moment in terms of that inflationary squeeze, there's also an element of that being a positive for the house price, and also the fact that you might see HMOs arguably as a safer type of investment class to invest into, because you're so much less likely to get a full and complete void period.
Yeah, sure. And of course, the yields are higher, so you can have one room actually empty and still make quite a nice return. So yes,
That's it. Yeah, that's
okay.
it.
Well, let's explore cutting costs, because I think everyone now needs to be looking, and I'm certainly, you know, sort of looking at my costs every month and making sure I can manage. Any indication from your surveys? Because I think one of the biggest costs that some landlords, and apologies if there are any letting agents listening, but some landlords may feel this is the time, because of their level of experience, they may wish to self-manage rather than using a letting agent. Do you see that as being a fundamental change going forward?
I don't know, in honesty. I don't know. I don't necessarily have any data on that kind of a decision. What we do know is the vast majority of landlords do understand that whilst we may see an inflationary pressure for another year or two, it's unlikely to last forever. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, so please don't caveat me on that in 3 years' time if we still have high inflation. But you know, we are setting a 2% inflationary target. We have, up until this point in the UK, been reasonably good at sustaining that. The Bank of England's targeting of that hasn't changed. So I think most people will understand that, you know, whilst their inflationary pressures might squeeze their profit, again, there are other avenues, and property investing as a whole, again, through that increased capital gain that you're likely to make, still represents as a whole a very good investment class. The other reason why I'd find it difficult to answer that question is a lot of people might see something like using a lettings agent to manage the property, instead of being a cost-driven choice, a lifestyle-driven choice. For example, I couldn't do that. I'm salaried. I have a very stressful job. I don't have the energy or the time to manage a buy-to-let property myself. But perhaps if you are a career landlord, that might be an option available to you. I don't have the data, unfortunately, on who's doing that, and if it is a
I just wondered if anyone coming through on the survey. I was very pleased that you mentioned the balance between yes, we are in a very much of a supply and demand, where the supply does not really meet the rental demand, and we're hearing stories of 20 people applying for one, you know, vacant
correct, yeah,
right to let. There is obviously a great temptation to, you know, fund this out by just putting up rents all the time, but the rents have to be sustainable in terms of what people can afford. So I was very keen on that, and I think, you know, that's where the smart landlords will recognise, and yes, I think, like myself, you know, we do have some concerns about looking after our tenants and keeping it as affordable as it can be. So it is a fine balance, isn't it, between, you know, what rents you set and what is actually affordable, to avoid the very large costs of void, because you can easily ruin your profitability by just over egging the rent and then having a void where people can't afford it.
That's exactly it, and I think balance and actually benevolence as well is key here. You know, we do need to understand, you know, particularly, you know, if we operate properties perhaps in certain areas, or we target certain types of tenants, that they may be feeling the cost of living increase far more than perhaps the average person might be here in the United Kingdom. So I think there's a kindness element to this, which doesn't really factor in a lot of other investment classes. But also, I think it's absolutely about balance. It's about maybe understanding and having the long-term view, which is, okay, I may not be making that £700 a month in profit. That might be down to 500 now because of inflationary pressures on X, Y, Z. But again, in the back of your mind, you've got to bear in mind that the likelihood is that your property price is going up by that 6.5%, 7%, 8% more than it would otherwise be. And trying to factor that into your overall thought process around it. You know, equally, I think there is really a temptation now, again, to just crank rents. But I think if you do that, you are far more likely to get void periods. And also you're far more likely to, even if you don't necessarily get a void period, you're far more likely to be in a situation where you may have tenants defaulting on rent, illegal occupation, things like that. So I think there's got to be a balance with that. But what we would encourage landlords to do, and what our data says that most landlords actually are doing right now, is taking a very wholesome view of this situation that we're in. We're all in it. We're all in it together. It probably isn't going to last forever. Let's take some solace in the fact that our property prices are likely rising considerably. Let's factor that into our thought processes. And then in a couple of years' time, let's revisit, or in a couple of months' time even, let's revisit those rental increases at a reasonable rate. But again, I'm not an advisor on what you should do with your portfolio.
No, absolutely not. Let's just go back to something else you mentioned in your presentation about landlords that are investing for the future. And I think one of the things that smart businesses do in a very tough climate is look at investment possibilities. And I think isn't this the time that landlords need to be investing not just in more property, but investing in themselves? There's an opportunity to learn more, to be able to do more yourself rather than contracting out. And actually, you may, if you become specialists, I'm talking about perhaps becoming a PAT tester, for example. It may be a service that you can offer to other landlords locally and, make supplementary income to offset maybe some of the extra costs that you've got in your business. Thoughts on that?
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. I don't think I've ever personally been in a situation where an increased level of knowledge hasn't resulted in some net benefit.
Yeah.
So I think, again, that's why we're so in love with our partnership with you guys at the Nrla, because what we think you provide is a really awesome forum for help, support, advice. And we want to do that as well at GetGround. Even if you are not a client of GetGround, if you haven't yet engaged with us as a business, there is so much resource on our website, which is www.getground.co.uk. So much on the blog. You can go in and create dummy companies and understand where you could maybe get tax efficiencies in your portfolio if you use limited companies. But yeah, wholeheartedly agree with you there, Don. I don't think there's ever been a situation that I've ever been in my professional life where just having that little bit more in terms of knowledge, efficiency hasn't resulted in a net gain overall.
Yeah. And as Joe says, I mean, we have a raft of training opportunities there, including learning to be qualified as a PAT tester. But also, if you would like to know more as landlords about becoming something like a domestic energy assessor or any other allied trade to it, then ask your local representative, and maybe that's something we can actually put into our local meeting. So please come and talk to us about what your thoughts are. Maybe you'll be speaking on behalf of other landlords in the area, and we can get a guest speaker to come and talk about life as a domestic energy assessor or whatever it is. So we have 5 minutes left, just roughly. I'm going to probably get into trouble for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Is there anyone out there that would like to ask Joe a question? I'm very happy to unmute you and let you, if you put your hand up, I'd like to have a live question from the audience if we have, because we've exhausted all the written questions and my prepared questions. Anyone like to ask a question at this stage? And we'll see what, I'm sure someone is, but yeah. Or anyone would like to ask another question before we close? Yeah, we've got some hands up. Let's see who we've got. Jessica. Do you want to just unmute yourself, Jessica? I know you asked a question earlier. If you want to ask another question, then please feel free to do so. Let me just see if I can get Jessica unmuted. No, I can't do that. Jessica, do you want to just put your question to the chat box, please, and we can ask?
Hello.
Oh, hello, there you are. Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay. Will do.
Take your time. Jessica, yeah, there you are.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So thank you very much for the presentation today. It's really good to kind of hear about your services. I've looked online and I'm just to make sure I'm clear about this. you offer the sort of formation of the company, of a limited company, but you've got the sort of accounting side of things as well.
Yeah.
So is that in place of your general account? Like, I have an accountant, so would that mean transferring the accounts of my property over to your services?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Yeah, absolutely. So the way our costing structure works, Jessica, and thank you very much for listening in today as well, by the way. We have one cost, which is for the setup and structuring of the limited company. And for NRLA members, that cost is £149 plus VAT. And you only ever pay for the first 2 companies that you create with us. And then we have an ongoing running of that company structure as well. So that ongoing fee, which is a subscription-based model, is correct, Jessica. It's for the accounting, tax filing, confirmation statements, your annual statements. We act as the company secretary. We provide a company bank account as well for you, all accessible and all easily manageable through the online platform. And the cost for that is £20 a month. Right. So yes, I suppose that would kind of replace a traditional accountant as well. I think for a lot of people, the benefit really not just comes from the fact that that cost is extremely competitive, but it comes from the fact that we no longer have to go to drive to our accountants and hand them a paper bag full of receipts. We can just upload those receipts to the platform, tag payments. It's a really innovative online platform, not just for setting up and structuring a limited company, but managing that ongoing side of things as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. That's great. And I'll just squeeze one more question
Thank you.
Cleveland, if we can unmute Cleveland, please, Sansel. Cleveland, do you want to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Cleveland.
Oh, hi there. I have just a little bit intrigued. One of the things that you mentioned was because I'm about to buy a property at the moment.
Okay.
And what I'm doing is the thing that you said regarding your individual and your company. Now, I use my individual as because I said it at 20%. So I use my individual, the companies I bought my individual name as my personal income. The ones in my company, I sort of just leave alone, and as you say, take out money via the director's loan account if I need it. However, the interest rates at the moment, buying into the company, and I'm thinking about buying this one in my name. Okay, but in order to swap over, so I'm saying to myself, if I'm buying it in my name, I want one to go into my company accounts. Into the SPV. So what I'm doing, I'm looking at the ones that have the lowest growth in terms of capital growth, and I'm going to move that one over. So they've got so I will pay tax on it, yes, capital gains tax, but I've just looked in, the ones that the lowest. I think that works for me. I think that's what I probably do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you advice, Cleveland, on what the best thing to do is. My opinion is that I don't see any gaps in your logic, but let's take that chat offline. Why don't you get into contact with me? I can get Don to send the slides over and my contact details as well. Yeah. Let's have a chat face to face. And again, I can't give you advice, so I can't tell you, what the right thing to do is, but I can give you all of the information that you might need in order to assess whether something like that from an information perspective would suit your needs or not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Cleveland, for that question. And it really does indicate the importance of taking advice and actually talking to people in the know and looking at it from all perspectives as to what is right for you. So a great thanks to Joe for a very enlightening hour. I can't believe how quickly this has gone. It almost seemed like we were just having a chat online, but I hope that people really got from you. But Joe, thank you for your presentation, your perspectives.
You're very welcome.
I hope you've given a lot of new ideas or additional ideas for people to think about. So thanks very much indeed.
And I hope, I hope that the landlords that are on today, have got a little bit better, maybe more of an idea of, what are your peers doing? What do your colleagues that are landlords also think about the situations that we're currently in? And I hope that, if any of you were teetering on the idea of maybe, downsizing your portfolios or upsizing your portfolios, that you now have some tangible data which might help you to make a more informed decision. Again, if you'd like to contact me, if you'd like to contact GetGround, I've got a wonderful team of consultants that are very great colleagues and very professional. Please do get in touch with us via the website, which again is www.getground.co.uk.
Thanks, and we'll see you soon, Joe. Yes, okay, so that's our webinar for today. Just to let you know that our next national webinar is this Wednesday, it's only 2 days away. And we've actually got webinars on tenancy clinics. And because we've listened to feedback, these are going to be run both at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Now, you could watch both if you want to, but the whole purpose is that you may have one particular time of day that's more suitable than another. So Wednesday, 6th of April, anything you want to ask the experts, and there'll be a panel of experts coming on to talk about any aspect of tenancies as a private landlord. And we're running those at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. So please, would you book on those if you're interested? And please keep an eye on the webinars calendar. So again, if you go onto the Nrla website, if you click on events and click on webinars calendar, you'll see both the national and the regional events that we've got coming up for you while we're still doing things remotely online. And as I said, hopefully we will be able to run face-to-face meetings later in the year, but that's still to be decided. And just finally, again, don't forget that to complete, we want to hear from you what you thought of this webinar and all other events. So please, after each one, when you get the questionnaire emailed to you, would you just please complete the feedback survey questionnaire and just let us know what you thought and your suggestions for the future. Your feedback is very important. That's all for today. I'm Don Robbie, and I'd like to thank you for joining us and for joining Joe as well. Wish you a very good afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.